Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about lazy kids. Yes. Does your child procrastinate, forget homework, resist chores, check out during lessons? Is it easy and tempting to label them lazy when this happens? There's a whole lot of research that shows that lazy is usually the wrong diagnosis, let's say. What looks like an unwillingness is more often a symptom, an immature or overwhelmed thought process, executive system. Sleep deprivation can contribute to it, low perceived control, task avoidance driven by fear or failure, neurodevelopmental differences like ADHD, even autism. Sluggish cognitive tempo, meaning that they don't have a rhythm in how they think. Treating children is that are willfully lazy. If you treat them that way, you're going to make very little progress because shame and guilt play a big role in that. And missing the supports they actually need. Because lazy is misleading because it implies choice, meaning the child decides not to try. But psychological research shows that many behaviors that we call as laziness are downstream effects of other problems. Once again, executive function weaknesses like planning, working memory, task initiation can make organized work feel overwhelming. Chronic poor sleep reduces energy, attention, motivation. So if they're sitting on their phone all night long, that's probably going to be a problem. Learned helplessness or mixed minds or fixed mindset makes effort feel futile. If they're always saying, you did this to me, or they did this to me, or she did this to me, or he did this to me, if you're hearing a lot of that, your question needs to be, yes, but what did you do? How did you contribute to the problem? Because you want to get I statements out of these kids. There's another contributor, sluggish cognitive tempo. And ADHD present as slow processing, daydreaming, low initiative, which are not moral failures. Anxiety and depression sap motivation, increase avoidance because now they're going to hypothesize all these horrible outcomes and then they have to create solutions to those horrible outcomes. Labeling a kid lazy often increases the shame and withdrawal. It worsens their performance, and instead, understanding the mechanism leads to kinder, evidence based responses that change outcomes. We're lazy people. We like to just blame kids for everything. We like to just label things as fast as we possibly can and then address people as the label that we've made them. That doesn't solve anything. Executive functions like planning, starting tasks, keeping steps in mind, switching attention develop across childhood and adolescence. And when the symptoms lag, children appear disorganized, procrastinating, unmotivated because their mental cost of starting feels too high. It may be that when they get home from school, they are hungry or hangry. And maybe that just alone gets in their way. Maybe, some kids get embarrassed because they don't want anybody to watch them eat. They get very embarrassed and very intimidated by that thought process. And so what they do is they don't eat at school, but what it does is it blows their concentration through half the day of school. Interventions that break tasks into tiny steps, like external, like timers and checklists, and scaffolding the planning, creating basically a system or a strategy produces a whole lot of big gains. If we look at the deficits and executive functioning of a kid, a significant part of that is learning to help them break things down in a pace and in a manner in which they can feel successful all the way through the system. It's really important for us to have patience. For instance, if you have a child that has ADHD, they are hunters. They are 30% of our population. They are linear thinkers. They're extrovert introverts. They're people that they're kids that put their friends in boxes. I do this with these friends. I do that with I play soccer with these friends. I play baseball with these friends. I go to movies with these friends. I go to do this with these friends. They put people in boxes. They like to be the champion. They don't like to be a team champion. They want to be the champion. These ADHD kids are meant to hunt. So if they're hunting a squirrel, they're going to go after the squirrel. But if you sit them in a classroom where they have to multitask, they're going to have a real problem because their brain is geared towards hunting the squirrel. So when they get obsessed on something they like a video game, which is all about hunting, by the way, they can't help themselves. They're lost in that. So while they're hunting the squirrel, you come up and ask them if you need to brush your teeth. They're probably going to throw a big temper tantrum because you're stopping them from shooting and killing the squirrel. These guys, they get hyper obsessed on the things that they love, but they have a real hard time adapting to what everybody else wants. Sleep is a primary driver for children. It's one of the clearest, best replicated causes of daytime functioning problems. Insufficient or irregular sleep reduces their attention, their memory, their mood, and their willingness to engage in effortful tasks. And there's a lot of studies that show links between poor sleep and lower academic performance. So, if you and your wonderful spouse sit around arguing all the time and can't stand each other, can barely stay in the same room, and you're in this disruptive house as a kid, there's a good chance you're not going to sleep very well because you're so worried that your parents are going to get divorced that all you can do is worry about their bull crap instead of deal with your developmental stage of life. So a lot of parents are stupid. And what they do is they create a very disruptive home because they're childish and stupid and they have to do their little Broadway performances with each other and pair the kids against each other and make each other out to be horrible people and they're the victims of their spouse. They love to live in that crap because they're children who happen to breed and happen to be parents. However, they don't necessarily know how to be parents because about half the people that are parents are breeding stock, not parents. They don't have the love for their kids. They have the love for themselves, but they had to breed so they could have something to carry on their family tradition and their own egotistical, stupid stuff that they have to pass on generation after generation after generation because they don't understand what love means or caring or parenting. All they care about is their own ugly ass gets whatever it needs. Before assuming laziness, you want to check into sleep quantity and quality. A lot of children, especially teens, get far less than the recommended hours. Improving consistent sleep schedules yields quick and observable improvements in motivation. But that means you're probably going to have to get rid of the phone. You're going to have to probably get rid of the iPad. You're probably going to have to get rid of the television so that they don't have all these distractions from sleeping. Also, when children repeatedly experience failure and criticism, if they have highly critical parents, well, you got an A, but you need an A plus, or you got a C on that exam. You're better than that. You should be getting an A plus. When you've got one of these turds as parents, it's horrible. What you want to do is talk to your kid's potential. I am proud of you for getting the grade you got, but listen, I know you can do better. I believe in you. What can I do to help you do a better job getting a better grade? Because we've got to get you into great opportunities when you graduate. We got to talk to the better parts of our kid instead of sitting around guilt and shaming them. If you do that, if you're one of these lazy people that sits around yelling at your kids about all their failures, you are doing more brain damage to your kids than you are helping them because you're lazy. So parents do a lot of damage to kids with their negativity, their guilt and shame. You got to get off your high horse. You got to get off your lazy ass and step into your kid's life so you can help them. When you got a kid that's overwhelmed, you don't sit there and beat them down for being lazy. You step into the problem and you go, what's going on? How can I help you? We've got to overcome this problem. But you've also got to create consequences for not taking accountability for their problem. That means, hey, if you can't even get your homework done, I don't think we can have these adult things like telephones. This is not going to work. I'm not going to endorse all these distractions because you're not getting the basic things done. You know, if your kid's going to not handle the problems in front of them, you've got to take the adult things they are striving for away from them. You know, not trying is really a bigger problem. If you're not even going to try, that means I have to start taking adult things away from you. So guess what? If you're going to be an adult in this life, you're going to have to learn how to survive. And not trying means that if I dropped you in the middle of a jungle, you would probably be dead in a week, probably a day. Not going to work. I'm not going to raise you to die in the jungle. I'm going to raise you to take accountability for your life and help yourself. And guess what? There is a checkout time. And when that checkout time happens in this house, that is the time that you have to take accountability completely for yourself. And I become a consultant. You know, ADHD and related things like sluggish cognitive tempo can present as low motivation, slow processing, daydreaming, seeming disengaged. What you have to realize is that we are not the same sized glass. Not all of us hold the same amount of water. Some people are very small, you know, espresso shots, and other people are very big gulp oriented glasses. And what may overwhelm one person may not overwhelm other people. We do not compare each other to each other. We all have different capacities of holding water. And so what we have to do is understand that as we get older, we may be able to hold more water and our glass may grow. However, right now, to understand how to work with you, I've got to accept the fact that you're an espresso shot trying to handle a big gulp worth of water. And so what we got to do is we got to slow things down so that the espresso shot can be full, be drank, and then move on to fill again, and then drink, and then fill again, and drink until it's all of the quantity of the big gulp. You know, despite having normal IQ levels, proving that laziness is not the same issue, you know, we have to understand how does this kid self-regulate? Because self-regulating means we have to create structure and we have to create a system. We have to create a strategy. And that means that part of teaching as a parent is developing a strategy that our kid can become successful and helping them do that. Kids who are anxious about tests, social status, parental expectations, you know, commonly withdraw from effortful tasks because they don't want to fail, they don't want to be criticized, and they don't want to be looked down on. So here is the developmental stages of life that you need to understand. It's basically called the 18-40-60 rule. So from 18 to 40, kids are so worried about how they're perceived, and actually it's before 18. They're worried about how people see them. So from 18 to 40, basically they're trying to prove to the world what a great adult they are. Look, I got the job, I got the house, I got the money in the bank, I got holidays at my place, I'm doing travel, I'm gonna be able to go on vacations. Look, I'm saving for college for my kids. Look, I got to breed. Look, I got the house. You know, they're trying to prove that what a great adult they are. After 40, you start to realize that nobody really thinks about you that much. And the truth is, if you knew that at 18, you'd have a hell of a lot better life. If you're living for how you appear, you are living for the wrong motivator. You have to discover who am I and what is my purpose. What is your purpose? Your purpose is the people in your life that you want to serve with the talent that you have. So, what the problem is that if you're going to help a kid that is completely overwhelmed, you have to understand what is their narrative about themselves and what is their narrative about how people see them. And as a parent, you've got to help them that way. All right, we're going to take a break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about lazy kids. You know, laziness is rarely a character flaw, it's rather a symptom of underlying issues like burnout, fear of failure, low motivation, ADHD, and it acts as a defense mechanism to conserve energy, avoid anxiety, or manage feeling overwhelmed. And it often stems from a low self-esteem, a lack of interest, high stress levels, rather than an inherent desire to be unproductive. So, what are the reasons for laziness? Well, number one is the fear of failure, perfectionism. The fear that if one tries and fails, it proves that they are incompetent, leading to inaction to maintain the fantasy of success. Now, if you have these jerk parents that want you to always be a superhero and the top of your class and you represent our family and you've got to be a straight A student, you're smarter than if you've got these perfectionistic parents, you're already one step down from being lazy because what's happening is you've got parents who expect you to do perfect. Perfect is a control mechanism that none of us are fully capable of doing on all across the board. So if you got these perfectionistic parents, you're going to turn your kid into the fear of failure. That kid is eventually going to be lazy, overwhelmed and burned out. Too much pressure, too many tasks causes a person to shut down and do nothing. And it's a common reaction to chronic stress. And once again, everybody's size of their cup is going to be different. Then there's this lack of intrinsic motivation, a lack of interest or personal connection to the task, which leads to low energy or procrastination. So, what you have to understand is to motivate yourself, you have to learn to attach an emotion to what you're doing. And that emotion could be anger, that emotion could be betrayal, that could be a negative emotion, or it could be a positive. It could be the feeling of joy, it could be what it's going to give to someone else. There's also, a lack of interest and personal connection with low energy and procrastination contributes to a lot of other problems, but it's a red flag that if you don't have a lot of motivators, there's a real good chance you are overwhelmed and disconnected from your own emotions. So, what you need to do is you need to calm yourself down and put a value behind every single thing that you need to get done and then create a strategy that breaks it down into getting those things done. There's also this evolutionary energy conservation. Humans are wired to conserve energy, making the brain prefer the easiest path, especially the payoff is not immediate. There's also underlying mental health conditions that people come with. Depression, which is basically unmet expectations, anxiety, fear, ADHD often present as laziness due to fatigue, executive dysfunction, and overwhelming apathy. Psychologists often analyze the behavior through the lenses like avoidance behavior, avoiding a task to temporarily escape anxiety, executive dysfunction, difficulty with planning, focusing on initiating tasks, which is common to ADHD. ADHD people respond really well to systems and structure. However, if you leave it to them to create the structure or the system, they're going to become very emotionally attached to their very strange system, and they're going to get really mad when you try to correct them because you were supposed to do it for them. The more you create structure for an ADHD person and the more of a structured environment they live in, they learn to be predictably successful. It gives them self-esteem. Also, procrastination. If a person habitually delays tasks due to emotional discomfort, what they're doing is they're sitting around waiting on an emotion to motivate them. Well, that's not going to happen. So what they do is they wait until the deadline. And then when the deadline comes around, that's when they either do it or don't do it. So what you have to understand is that people that procrastinate are depressed. It's depression. And procrastination means they're not so confident that they have the ability to get something done. So what you have to understand if you're a procrastinator is you have put a billboard on your forehead to introduce to the world that you are a depressed person. Procrastinators are depressed. Procrastinators are advertising their depression. Procrastinators are advertising their anxiety. They're advertising the fact that they have a mental disorder. There's also self-handicapping, creating obstacles to your own performance to avoid taking responsibility for failure. So what a lot of people do is they want to blame everybody else and make everybody else the problem because they have a victim mentality. And that's called gaslighting. So a lot of narcissists use self-handicapping by creating obstacles for them to prevent them from being shown to be the dummy that they are and the selfish pig that they are. So what they do is they create the sense that, well, I'm on a team and my team is not performing. They're not doing what they're supposed to do, so I can't do what I'm supposed to do. It's all this person's fault. If they didn't create this problem, then I wouldn't have this problem. So they're really, really good at making excuses. So what we have to do is we have to have a little bit of empathy. A little bit of empathy goes a long way in trying to help people understand. A lot of parents are very, very, very quick to label their kid as lazy because the kid doesn't want to do their homework, they play with their friends, they engage in extracurricular activities. These children may also avoid and procrastinate or complain being bored. Well, here's the deal. Bored people are boring. If we dig a little deeper, we can easily find underlying causes for laziness. Despite the differences in their temperament, most kids are born and raised to be curious, social, motivated, and happy. And when a kid is not performing the same level as their peers, there is often something wrong. Depression, sadness, apathy, lethargy, concentration difficulties. Those are all ingredients of childhood depression. Anxiety, fear of failure or disappointment or perfectionism. Cognitive deficit like ADHD or a learning disability. Or Asperger's, which is a form of autism. Skill deficit is another problem. They were never taught, doesn't know how to problem solve. We as parents, part of our job is to learn to break things down for our kids to help them learn, to teach. That is your role as a parent. It's not all of the teacher's jobs to do that for you. Then there's this thing called learned dependence, codependence, over-reliance on other people. This comes from what's called soft parenting. So you have these parents that say, "Well, I'm going to take this away from you if you don't do this." And then they it comes to the time they're supposed to take it away. They're like, "Well, if you can do it tomorrow then." If you got soft parents, you've got somebody who's teaching their kid to be codependent on them. Then there is the lack of interest in the task, no desire to complete unwanted things. Well, anything hard makes your life easier. So if you don't teach your kids how to do hard, if you don't have boundaries, if you don't have discipline, you're not going to be able to teach your kids how to do hard things. You have got to have some form of discipline, which teaches. That's what discipline is about. It's not to hurt your kids' feelings. It's not to let your anger out on hitting them or doing something bad to your kids because you're angry at them. It's to teach. That is the whole point of discipline. So you need to learn how to do discipline to teach your kids how to get things done that they need to get done. The best way for parents to understand and help their kid overcome laziness is to relabel the action or lack of action with its underlying cause. Try not to express anger or frustration about the kid's behavior. Repeat to yourself, my child is doing the best they can. My kid is overwhelmed. I need to discover, not they, I need to discover what is going on that is overwhelming this child. We need to join with them by verbalizing what you believe is getting in their way. Share your own experiences with overcoming laziness. Provide them with the tools they need to be successful on their own. It may be therapy, it may be medication, it may be tutoring, it may be learning remediation, teaching them the skill, changing the family dynamics, maybe teaching them basic manners, which is very much not something that people are doing today. Does your kid even open the door for their mother? Do they do that? I mean, can you at least teach them one sense of manners in this life? Practice with them until they build confidence. That is your job as a parent. You need to be a part of your kid's life. Kids of all ages sometimes struggle with motivation. If you're having difficulty getting your kid to complete their homework or household duties, you may worry that your child's lack of motivation could worsen as they grow older. But determining what may be hindering your kid's desire to succeed, you can address the concerns and help them regain their drive to excel. So, hey, if you've taken every single thing away from your kid, if you strip their room down to even taking the door off the hinges, you're probably not doing a very good job parenting. The deal is you need to have behavior contracts with your kids after they're about 10 years old. So what is a behavior contract? It's very simple. You need to do your chores, you need to do your homework, and you need to clean your room. And maybe you need to not talk back. Okay? So the things that you want to extinguish or the things that you want to make stronger are the things you put in a behavior contract. So what you do is when they violate the contract, you say, hey, you're going to lose this thing for a day. But if you apologize, it's a half a day. But it has to be a real apology. Then if they do one of those things again, it's 3 days and no apology. If you do it again, it's 7 days and no apology. If they do all of the things in the contract correctly for 5 days, you want to give them a reward. And I'm not saying a financial reward. I'm saying something that they really want to do after the 5th day. You want to give them positives. You want to give them a reward system that is good at the end of the contract. If you have that contract with your kids, now discipline is very transactional. It's not emotional. The more emotional you make your discipline, the bigger the problem's going to be. If you start arguing with your kid about discipline, you've already lost. You need to shut the hell up, be transactional with your kids. Okay, you decided to talk back. So since you're going to talk back, I have to take your phone away for a day. If you apologize, it's a half a day. But I'm doing it, and you know I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it to hurt you. I'm doing it to teach you. Everything you do in discipline needs to be transactional, not emotional, because your kid is going to want to make it emotional for you. No, I let you get away with this the last time. I'm not going to do that again. Blah, 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 blah. If you're going to be one of these people that argue with your kid over discipline, they have won the battle because now you're disciplining from emotion. So that's what the kid wants because now they can say, see, you're just mad at me and that's why you're doing this. See, you're more emotional about this than I am. See, they want to turn the table on you. So if you're going to be one of these idiots that parents from your emotions, you've already discovered that you're probably a really crappy parent. You have to parent transactionally. So you didn't do this, this is what you lose. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're sad. I'm sorry it affects you like this, but you decided to do this. That is what a behavior contract's about. Putting the accountability back on the kid. It is their choice, not your choice. You're just there to implement the contract. While kids struggle to see the importance of completing homework or chores, I don't even know why I'm in school. I'm not learning anything. Well, you don't know what you're going to need in your adult life, but I do. And if it's being taught in school, there's a real good chance you're going to need that in your adult life. So guess what? You're in school to learn how to do life. You're learning how to be an adult. You're learning how to make decisions because down the road, you're going to need this knowledge. So you don't know that now, but you're going to need to know it later. So guess what? It's important. Some of the causes may be to the laziness is learning disorders. Some kids struggle with math, reading, writing, other academic areas leads to frustration, and it impacts motivation. If you have not learned, if your kid has a learning disorder, you need to get an IEP, individual education program, or a 504 with your school district, with your school, because your principal is going to say, no, I don't want to do it. But if you go to the school district, you got a better chance because the principal is trying to manage their budget. So what you want to do is you want to get an individual education program, which is a legal contract with the school district, which makes them test your kid for learning disabilities. That is the biggest priority you want to do in school with your kid is learn if they have learning disabilities and then put an individual education program around that. And that's for public schools, but you can also get an IEP from the school district, even if they're in a private school. You have that right as a taxpayer. Also, executive functioning difficulties are big problems that contribute to laziness. If they're not good at time management, if they're not good at planning, if they're not good at organizing, if they're not good at self-regulation, if they have a difficult time focusing, resulting in feelings of inadequacy. And if you're terrible at doing that too, you need to line somebody up to help you. Maybe you need a tutor on how to be a parent. But we need to get this done. You don't want to pass this on generation after generation in your kids. Boredom. Some kid may become disengaged and their academic work isn't challenging enough, and it impacts their motivation to complete assignments. Is your kid in the right educational place where they need to be? Many kids aren't. Many kids are behind in school because of COVID and because our education system absolutely sucks because of social justice and all the stupid transvestites running your school districts. So the bottom line is if your school district doesn't have priorities around educating, maybe you need to send your kid to a private school. Can you afford it? Probably not. Or maybe you need to find a way to homeschool them because if you got your local friendly transvestite running your school district, you probably got a problem. Or if you got all the transvestites in your school district teaching your kids, you probably got a problem there. So you need to investigate if your school is even teaching kids regular education or if they're dumbing them down so they can turn them into a transvestite. You never know, but that's what their priorities are these days. The deal is your kid is bored because they're not using their brain. And you need to teach them and figure out how to ignite your kids, what motivates them, what engages them. This is a very important thing. And then you need to use those things to help guide them and use it as a commodity to shape their behavior. All right, we're going to take another break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about lazy kids. Anxiety, which is a fear of failure or perfectionism, prevents kids from engaging in activities or trying new things because what they do is they live in hypothesis. Well, if this happens, then this is what I'll have to do. If this happens, then this is going to be the consequences of that. If that happens, then this is what's going to go on. And what they do is they start calculating in their kid how the possible failures, how many possible ways they can fail, and then they're trying to figure out how to make something of it. And by the time that they get done hypothesizing, they're completely depressed, completely anxious, completely afraid, and they burn their brain completely out. Now, when fear enters, faith leaves. Faith enters, fear leaves. So, if you learn to teach your kid to have faith in themselves, I believe in you. I know you can do this. You may not be perfect at this, but give it some effort. If you are working with a kid who has got anxiety or depression, their will is broken. Did you break their will? Were you an asshole? Did you traumatize your kids? You might have. So if you did and you broke their will because of some jerk you married or some idiot way you've parented, you probably owe it to your kid to figure out a way how they can get their will back. And that means that you yourself need to tap into your own will and you need to teach them how to believe in themselves. A lot of people in this day and age do not believe in themselves, do not have a will. They live in a try. Well, a try is about the worst word in the English language. You either will or you won't. That's the way we need to function. That's the way we survive. We will or won't. It's not try. Are you going to try to be married? Well, a lot of people do. That's why we have a 68% divorce rate, because a try has a back door, and most people are sneaking out the back door as often as they can in their head or with their little penises and vaginas. There's also depression, sadness, lethargy, apathy are symptoms of depression that can significantly affect a kid's motivation and desire to engage in activities. Well, what is depression? Depression is unmet expectations. Could be your expectations for your kid. It could be their expectations of themselves. It could be what they think other kids expect of them. It could be what their teacher expects of them. So expectations are very depressing because when they're not met, you are either a failure or a betrayal. Those are really nasty emotions and pretty hopeless. What we have to understand is that the opposite of depression is living in the idea that I prefer that I got an A instead of a B. I prefer that I got this done. I would prefer you talk to me like this. I would prefer that we did this, this, and this. Now you're putting your needs out there without an expectation. Now that is called respectful communication. That is called respecting yourself and respecting others. Preferences. I prefer. That is the remedy to depression because that is the baseline that you start to work with. That is the baseline you start to communicate with so you teach people how to love you, but you're not forcing it down their throat. Low self-esteem is another contributor to what we call laziness. If your kid lacks confidence in their abilities, they are going to hesitate to put forth effort in their studies. What you have to do is believe in them. You know, so many kids do not make effort in doing new things because of their level of confidence. If you, as a parent, don't believe in them, how in the world can they believe in themselves? You have to do it first to teach them how to believe in themselves. If you do not believe in your kid, if you're all into your negative criticisms because of your laziness, then what you need to do is get off your fat ass and get into your brain and decide to be a grateful person who motivates your kid to be the better part of who they are. If you want to influence your kid in a better way, be nice, be positive, be hopeful, and create opportunity and get out there and be a part of your kid's life. In addition to your home environment, you may also affect your kid's lack of motivation. Children who grow up in unstructured environments face stress or conflict within their family dynamics are going to have a lot of trouble. If you've got a bunch of idiot kids who are undisciplined out there yelling at each other and screaming and doing stupid things and eating in their own rooms and disrespecting each other, and you're not parenting them, you got a problem. That's a high conflict home. That's a home where it's going to be really hard for them to focus. That's going to be a home where there's going to be a lot of oppositional defiance. If you are unstructured and worthless, if you come home and say, I'm a victim, I'm too tired, then why did you breed? Get off your ass, get into the job. You decided to be a parent, be a parent. Step into it. Do the job. You're not a victim. You know, the deal is that these parents come home with these victim themes as if, no, this is just so much work and I'm just so overwhelmed and nobody appreciates me and blah, 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 blah. You're just a freaking narcissist. Get over yourself and stand up on your hind legs and step into the job of being a parent. You get to be a parent. That's how you need to look at it. You get to be a husband. You get to be a wife. Be that rather than the victim coming home to your pitiful little victim themes. Motivation is what drives us. Even when we face challenges, you can inspire motivation in your kid by supporting their efforts in a lot of ways, like setting expectations of things that they can accomplish, using positive reinforcement when they do, modeling behaviors you wish to see in them. If you're not doing it yourself, you shouldn't expect it of your kid. If you're late to everything, expect your kid to be late to everything. If you cuss, expect your kid to cuss. If you are disrespectful, expect your kid to be disrespectful. You know, you are the example. They are just mimicking you. If you are giving them that example and then you're consequenting them for the things you're doing yourself, you're about as worthless as tits on a boar hog. You need to back up and understand that if you're not taking accountability, your kid sure as hell isn't going to take accountability. We know positive reinforcement, gratefulness are very attractive features. We want to teach our kids the value of positive reinforcement, believing in them, believing in another person, and gratitude. These are very powerful motivators. But also, we need to have boundaries. We need to have discipline that teaches. This is very important. Praising your kid when they attempt to complete their tasks boosts their self-esteem, motivates them to continue. You may also consider rewarding them if they consistently demonstrate those behaviors. You also want to encourage independence and responsibility. When your kid may require occasional reminders of their responsibility, you should encourage them to stay accountable for their actions. Hey, look, I don't want to have to remind you of this every day. If I have to remind you, I'll do it for the next day, but after that, it's going to be your deal. And if you don't, here's the consequence. So you're trying to teach them to own their life. When you hear excuses, when you hear they, them, he, she, when you hear blaming, you also want to understand, what did I do? And that includes you. What did I do to contribute to this problem? That is what we need to be teaching our kids. It's called accountability. If your kid struggles stay motivated and complete their work, ask them, what is the challenge? What are the concerns they have? What is getting in their way? What is overwhelming them? Are they being bullied? Do they have a bad teacher? Do they need tutoring? Do we need to change their friends? What kind of people are they hanging out with? What is influencing their life? What are their distractions? What are the things getting in the way of them getting things done? You've got to teach your kids to prioritize the priorities that are going to make their life better. You need to take it really serious, those things that are important. But the biggest and most serious thing you need to take is your kid's education. And if you got a bunch of ugly transvestites or liberal crazies at your school, probably not the best place to educate them. So maybe you're going to have to work a second job so your kid will get a decent education. So that's what you get for moving into that school district. Maybe you need to sell your house and move somewhere where your kid gets a better education. You have to meet kids where they are. If your kid struggles to stay motivated, complete their work, ask them what challenges or concerns they have. Fear of failure, learning difficulties can be the root causes of your kid's issues. By trying to understand their perspective on the situation, you can work collaborative to find solutions that enhance motivation. Also, making learning and tasks more engaging. This is a big part of parenting. If you suspect that the boredom affects your kid's drive, try to make the task more engaging. For example, you might suggest they listen to music while doing chores, or break larger homework assignments into smaller sections, taking a break every 10, 15, 30 minutes to recharge. These tips can help make boring or overwhelming tasks more manageable and easier to accomplish. Create a reward system for them making progress on their homework. Kids imitate their parents' actions, regardless of whether they are good or bad. If you want to encourage your kid to take on more responsibility for their household chores or their homework, allow them to observe you completing your own tasks. After all, you can't expect your kid to finish their chores promptly when they see you not doing a damn thing, or you expecting them to do everything. You are the example. You need to step up and step into your adult life. And yes, if your penis and vagina created this kid, you're going to have to own it, and you're going to have to be an example. So guess what? Step into your big boy pants and be an adult and be a parent. The common label of a lazy kid includes chronic procrastination, avoiding chores, excessive screen time, irritability, complaining. They may show low motivation for schoolwork, resist new activities, need constant reminders, complete tasks. But that has to do with poor parenting. Maybe you need to read a book on how to parent. Not a bad idea. Avoidance and procrastination, putting off things, it's a big sign. Passive aggressive resistance, agreeing to do something but not doing it, or doing it poorly, or avoiding. That's a passive aggressive trait. There are a lot of people that are afraid of conflict, including the people that breed and have children, unfortunately. But conflict in a family is meant to make your life better. It's not to hurt somebody's feelings. A lot of people don't understand that. They view conflict as horrible. Oh, my parents never argued. Well, they were probably crappy parents for not arguing, because they were supposed to teach you how to be constructive and how to solve problems. And one of them is conflict. Conflict makes your life better if it is done properly and respectfully. That is taught by your parents. So you need to learn how to do that. But the underlying causes, you have to have enough curiosity to look into underlying causes. If you have a passive aggressive kid, for example, passive aggressive people are like a teapot that heats up, and once it hits the boiling point, it blows, and it blows loud. So what that means is they store up their anger and their frustrations and they don't express it. But when they finally do, and some stupid little thing happens, and you say something, and it's in this weird time, like they're in the backseat of the car on a Sunday, and they all of a sudden blow into some crazy person, or maybe your spouse does that because that's more often the case. And you look at them and go, "Oh my God, you need therapy." Well, the reason they do that is because they're passive aggressive. They blow out of nowhere because they store everything up until it finally hits the threshold and it blows. And when they blow, it represents all of the events that they've stored up, not just the one. The other problem is that by them storing it up, they look like a monster. Therefore, you start yelling at them and being mad at them for the way they're behaving and the way that they threw a temper tantrum instead of trying to solve the problem, which is they need to learn how to communicate their feelings. This is a part of you as a parent. You're supposed to teach your kid how to address their feelings, how to have feelings, how to share feelings, how to hear feelings, how to understand feelings, how to let them and validate feelings. Because that's the basis of all relationships. Your feelings. If you make feelings unsafe as a parent and you consequent them every time they throw a temper tantrum, you are the problem. Shut the hell up, validate their feelings, understand where they're coming from, stop defending your stupidity, and try to be nice and be understanding because that is the value system of all people in all relationships. They work on understanding each other's feelings and then solving the problem. If you're one of these analytical idiots like the people in Seattle that put all the analysis first instead of emotions, you're probably going to have a lot of social problems. There's also environmental problems that create a problem with laziness, a lack of structure, poor sleep, lack of accountability. If you've taught them not to be accountable, that's your problem. You taught them not to be accountable, so until you do teach them how to be accountable, they're not going to be accountable. But if you yourself are not accountable because you're a narcissist, then we got a big problem. Read a book on parenting. Humble yourself into the idea that you are a parent. You're there to teach. You're not there to destroy your kid's life. If you're a good parent, you'll reduce your lectures, avoid lecturing because that causes stress. Listen to their perspective because the listener is the one in charge of the conversation. Focus on their effort, not the outcome. So set very clear consequences if they don't get things done, but break it down so they can take it bite by bite. This is a very, very important part of laziness. It's very important for us to have a sense of empathy for our kids. It is very hard to be a child. It is very hard, especially if you have terrible parents. It's very hard if you have mediocre parents. It's very hard if you have narcissistic parents. It's very hard if you have very selfish parents. It's very hard if you have single parents. It's very hard to be a kid in this world because they are easily forgotten. You have one job as a parent. Be a parent. Be that. Teach your kids. That's your job, to teach them how to do life. Being their best friend is not your job, but being the person who understands them is your job, and in that, you will be their best friend. All right, that's our show. I want to thank everybody for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com or libsyn, libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, cleaning a house with kids is like brushing your teeth while eating Oreos. Also, if you get excited about canceling your plans, you're lazy. Also, people confuse a desire to clean house as a desire to clean up after you.